Thanks, Roanne. My name's Rick. I'm alcoholic. Good to be here this morning. Really grateful to be doing a workshop on the concepts. You know, it'd be a lot easier to do something on the steps, right? The traditions, or not. Right? How many people here this morning have ever served as a trustee to the General Service Board? Anybody in this room ever been a delegate to the General Service Conference? Anybody been a DCM? Now we're getting somewhere. How about a GSR? Okay, so now I know who I'm talking to. Okay? What we're going to do is, I don't know what we're going to do. I think I'm pretty well prayed up, so we're just going to see where this goes. All right? Now, by their very nature, the 12 concepts are very boring. There's a damn good reason for that. It's because an international lawyer helped draft them, right? But they're essentially spiritual principles for us to live by. And for those of you that are wondering, we're going to take a break. They got like 3 hours scheduled for this thing. We're going to take a break in about an hour. Let folks smoke and then decide whether you want to get back together or not. Right? So let me tell you how I got here today. I got sober on July 3rd, 1986. Yo! We have ways of making you talk, right? Damn.
And it's not the cops.
Wow. Honest, officer, I didn't do it. The gun's in the weeds. It's not mine, right? So what happened was I did a little bit of praying. I went to a lot of meetings for about 6 years. And on the first weekend of May of 1992, I ended up hosting a speaker. And the guy carried a message of Alcoholics Anonymous that I'd never heard in the small town that I'm from. He talked freely about the power of God. He talked freely about an illness that was an allergy to alcohol, and coupled with an obsession of the mind. And his display of this stuff over the course of the weekend was so riveting to me that I asked him if he'd work with me, and he said that he would. And one of the first things that we did was he asked me to open up my big book. And we did all this over the phone, by the way. He lived in California, and I live in eastern Iowa. And on the old title page of the old third edition books, there was a circle and a triangle. We've lost that circle and triangle. We're not very good at trademark laws and stuff like that. So right? We're better because we lost that. But at any rate, what this guy did with me on a Sunday afternoon over the phone, he talked to me about this circle and the triangle. And he talked about the three sides of this triangle, the recovery side at the base, at the bottom of that triangle. And he asked me where I would find that. And I said, in meetings. And he said, well, maybe, but maybe not. And he said, well, what's this unity side of it? Where would we find that? And I said, in meetings. And he said, now you're talking. And he said, what about this recovery side? Or, excuse me, the service side? I said, well, we'd find that in meetings. And we talked a little bit more about it. And he asked me, he said, have you ever heard the phrase, bring the mind and the body will follow? Or bring the body and the mind will follow. Excuse me, I'm a little nervous. I'll get out of the way here in a second. And I said, yeah, I've heard that. And what happens, he says, we bring the body to the meetings and the mind follows to the steps, to the recovery part. And he said, what if I told you that for each side of that triangle, there's a part of our disease that will match up with it? The unity side has to do with the body. The recovery side has to do with the mind. The service side has to do with the spirit. I'm like, wow. right? He said, what if I told you that for each side of that triangle there's a group of 12 spiritual principles? And because they're spiritual in their nature, we can apply them in any part of our life. I wasn't in much of a mood to argue or a position to argue, so I just agreed with him, right? And he said on the recovery side of that triangle, we have the 12 steps. Okay? If we take the 12 steps, we'll recover. On the unity side of that triangle, we have the 12 traditions. Those are what keep us unified in our purpose. That's what holds us together. And he said, and on the service side, we have the 12 concepts of world service. And I said to him, what? For 6 years in AA, I'd never heard of the concepts. I'd never heard of the 12 concepts. And all he did really was introduce me to the idea that they were there. And I worked with him for about 3 years. And he moved out of the country, and his sponsor then became my sponsor. And my new sponsor had been a trustee, and he knew some stuff. And as time went on, he started talking to me about some things. And there was an issue that came up. And I called him and asked him, he said, well, why don't you ask your GSR to ask your delegate? And I said, what? And he said, doesn't your group have a GSR? And I said, well, no, we had one 4 or 5 years ago, but we don't have one. We don't get too involved in the politics. And he said, well, that's unfortunate because AA doesn't have politics, right? And I said, well, what's a GSR and what's a delegate? And he explained some stuff to me. And he says, well, maybe you should talk to your group and see if maybe they have an interest in this. Find out when he told me when our next area committee meeting was. And he lived in Colorado, right? He knew this stuff. It's like, wow, this guy got a crystal ball or what, right? It's not really that hard to find out once you get in the loop. And I went to our group, and I'm talking at a business meeting. And I said, look, my sponsor says that there's this area assembly going on up in Cedar Rapids in a few weeks, and that we should maybe think about one of us going up there and seeing what's going on so that we can decide whether we want to be involved with AA as a whole or not. What do you guys think of that? And there was 10 of us or so, 10 or 12 of us, and everybody thought that was a pretty good idea. And then it came time to vote on who was going to do that, and they said, well, we really don't need to vote. Rick, we think you should go up to Cedar Rapids and come back and tell us what you saw, and then we'll decide whether we want to stay involved in it. So I went, and I came back, and I reported, and they decided that we should stay involved in it. And then we needed to pick a GSR, and they said, well, we don't really need to pick one. You'll do just fine. So I became a GSR. And then at the end of that stint, I wasn't very much impressed with this general service stuff. Quite frankly, most of the folks that are involved in it, based on my vision at that time, were stark raving lunatics, and not very nice about it either. They were very angry, right, and very focused and narrow-minded, and didn't really know much about the principles in our book and stuff like that, right? Now, of course, I'm not talking about anybody in this room, nor anybody that would hear this recording in the future. So, at the end of this stint as being a GSR, I have visions of, I'm done with general service, I did my lick, I'm going to get on my motorcycle and ride off into the sunset. And it comes time to elect a DCM at the end of my term as a GSR. The GSRs select the DCM, and there was about 8 of us, 8 or 9 of us. Must have been 9 of us. I don't know. Maybe there was 8 of us. I don't remember. But only one guy is standing, and we don't run for positions in AA, right? We simply make ourselves available, right? And so there was only one person that stood. This one guy stood, right? And I'm waiting for some other GSR to say, I will also stand for that position so we can have an election. Nobody's having it. And I'm looking at this guy that's standing, and I'm going, oh, hell no. No. I'm not trusting the future of AA to this guy, right? I'll stand, right? I'll stand also. Well, we go 4 ballots, and it's 4-4. And so they put the names in the hat, and they drew my name out. And now what am I going to do? I'm a DCM. I don't even like general service, right? So I go home and I call my sponsor, and I say to him, I really screwed up. I went and got myself to become a DCM, and I don't know what to do. And what I'm going to say to you now is probably the most important thing that anybody has ever said to me in regards to general service to our fellowship. What that man said to me that day was, Rick, it's not your job to change Alcoholics Anonymous. Your job is to make sure that the policies, the principles, and the procedures that are already in place are followed. And if we follow those principles, those policies, and those procedures, the voice of God will always come through our group conscience. That's your job, to make sure that those things are followed. It's not your job to change a thing. And when he said that to me, I got goosebumps like I just did, because it was like, holy cow, Toto, we ain't in Kansas no more, right? This is serious stuff. And so I became a DCM. At the end of the DCM thing, I'm done. I'm going to get on my motorcycle. I'm going to ride off into the sunset. And then at an area assembly, at an election, somebody asked me if I would serve as our area treatment chair. And there was one vote against me being the area treatment chair at that assembly. And I'm proud to tell you that vote was mine, right? And so I did that. The next time, the next 2-year assembly comes around, and I was asked to serve as the area corrections chair. I have passion about that. I've went into jails and prisons for many, many years, and I continue to do so on a nearly weekly basis. And I became our area corrections chair. At the end of that 2-year period, I've had my belly full of general service. And a few weeks before our assembly to select a new delegate, about 6 people asked me if I would stand for being a delegate. And my response to the first 3 was, are you crazy, right? And the next 3, I started to listen. And so I stood for delegate. And at the end of 4 ballots, the lady who also had stood, in order for us to select a delegate, we need substantial unanimity. And what that means is at least a 2/3 majority vote, okay? And for 4 ballots, that lady was 3 votes shy of the 2/3 majority. And it was very clear to me that our area did not want me to be our delegate, right? And so I go up to the front table where our delegate, who's a good friend of mine, was standing. And I said, Mike, I'd kind of like to just pull out of this thing. And he talks very slowly and deliberately. And he says, and he looks at me and smiles, and he says, ain't you the guy that says that it's our job to follow the policies and the procedures and the principles that are already in place? And if we do that, the voice of God will always come through our group conscience? And I said, yeah. And he said, then why don't you go sit your ass down and let the policies and procedures and principles that we got do what they do? So I went and sat down, and they went to the hat, and my name came out of the hat. And I became a delegate to the General Service Conference. And in the process, I figured out that I needed to find out something about these concepts. That these concepts have to do with our relation to the General Service Board and the General Service Board's relation to the General Service Conference. And it's almost like it's a series of checks and balances, if you will. If we read it, and today we won't read the long form, because by the time I get to the long, get done reading the long form of one of our concepts, there'll be people going to their happy places, right? It's very wordy, right? What I need to do now, I think, is because of who we're talking with, we need to understand what the General Service Conference is. That in 1950-ish, Dr. Bob was very sick. And it was not a big secret he wasn't going to be around too much longer. And Bill got a little nervous, I imagine. Wouldn't you? That for the entire lifetime of this fellowship, people had come to Dr. Bob and to Bill for all the direction, right? All of the guidance of this thing came from those guys. And of course, there was the Alcoholic Foundation. There was a bunch of trustees that helped Bill guide things. But really, Bill and Bob were the answer guys. And now Dr. Bob's dying. And Bill was suddenly faced with his own mortality. And I think about it at times, and I think about, Dr. Bob had given his services freely to 5,000 alcoholics in the 15 years that he was sober, right? And Bill, we don't know how many drunks Bill worked with, but it appears to me that he gave his life's work was to the formation of this fellowship that we enjoy now. And that one of the greatest acts of humility that I believe, that I could imagine any of us doing, would be putting together a plan so that the thing that I gave my life to form and to keep alive would no longer need me. Right? It's kind of like that day when your kid graduates from high school, right? In my case, my dad broke my supper plate. Said, "You're on your own now, kid. Get the hell out of here," right? It's like letting that kid walk away. So Bill realized that he was going to die one day. And that somebody needed to be the guides for this thing. And he realized that nobody could guide this thing better than we could. And so him and his friend Bernie Smith, they sat down and they formulated the conference plan. And out of that came our 12 concepts for world service. See, Bill knew that the trustees, all of us couldn't be the people that the world saw. That there was going to have to be a small group of individuals that could do the world service work of AA. Am I losing you guys, or am I? Right? I don't want to be boring. I'll tell you a dirty joke if I have to. Right? I'm kidding. Well, no, I'm not really. But Bill seen that there had to be something that could guide the future of this thing, right? That the trustees were going to be essentially the caretakers of this thing. They're going to be the custodians of Alcoholics Anonymous. But they had to be held accountable to some degree. And they had to get guidance from our fellowship. And so what they proposed was that they would elect delegates that would get together for a conference once a year, right? And that every state at that time would elect a delegate. Now there's 93 delegates that go to the General Service Conference. At any given time, have any of you people ever imagined what the General Service Conference looks like? Have you ever thought about it? It's huge, isn't it? It's like meets in the Astrodome in Houston, right? No. It's in a room that's smaller than this. This room is bigger than the room that we have the General Service Conference in. There's only 130 of us that vote, right? Some staff members, the 21 trustees, 93 delegates, right? And so these delegates come together with the trustees and with some staff members. And what we do is we make decisions to help guide the future of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to read something for you guys. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to read more than I usually do. I don't like to read, but this just needs to be read. This is called the AA Service Manual, by the way. Some of you may not be familiar with it. Don't be embarrassed if you're not, right? I don't know why anybody... This isn't something that you just sit down and read for a nice leisurely evening, right? Okay? But I'm going to read something that's in this manual, and it's entitled "Why Do We Need a Conference?" Have any of you people heard this before? The late Bernard B. Smith, a non-alcoholic, then chairperson of the Board of Trustees and one of the architects of the conference structure, answered that question superbly in his opening talk at the 1954 meeting. We may not need a general service conference to ensure our own recovery. We do need it to ensure the recovery of the alcoholic who still stumbles in the darkness one short block from this room. We need it to ensure the recovery of a child being born tonight destined for alcoholism. We need it to provide, in keeping with our 12th step, a permanent haven for all alcoholics who, in the ages ahead, can find in AA that rebirth that brought us back to life. We need it because we, more than all others, are conscious of the devastating effect of the human urge for power and prestige, which we must ensure can never invade AA. We need it to ensure AA against government while insulating it against anarchy. We need it to protect AA against disintegration while preventing over-integration. We need it so that Alcoholics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous alone is the ultimate repository of its 12 steps, its 12 traditions, and all of its services. We need it to ensure that changes within AA come only as a response to the needs and the wants of all of AA and not of any few. We need it to ensure that the doors of the halls of AA never have locks on them, so that all people, for all time, who have an alcoholic problem may enter these halls unasked and feel welcome. We need it to ensure that Alcoholics Anonymous never ask anyone who needs us what his or her race is, what his or her creed is, what his or her social position is. And if we don't have that conference, all we're left with is hundreds of thousands of small groups that make it up as they go. And so these concepts help us to understand our relationship to things. The first concept in the short form is the final responsibility and ultimate authority for AA World Services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. And the way that collective conscience happens for our whole fellowship is a really interesting thing. That we've already talked about having 93 delegates, right? There's 93 delegates in the United States and Canada. Now there's general service structures all over the world, but they're separate entities. They're separate entities from out. When I was a delegate, there were some folks almost every year at the General Service Conference, there are visitors, observers, that come from around the world. And when I was there, there were some folks from South America, from Bolivia and Colombia and Brazil that were there the one year that I remember. And what they were doing is they were watching our conference operate because they're wanting to build a General Service Conference that would emulate ours, right? It's interesting if we know folks who live overseas, say in England, they also have a General Service Conference, a General Service structure. It's quite different than ours, quite different. So the way that we get this collective conscience is by selecting these delegates. And the delegate thing is set up really neatly in that we serve 2 years as a delegate, with half of us being in our first year and the other half being in our second year. Now, every once in a while there comes around an idea of, wouldn't we be better served if our delegates did 3 years, the way Al-Anon does? And I would like to go on record saying that if you put any of us in there for 3 years, that's long enough that we could really screw things up. And I seriously believe that. It's because the first year I didn't really understand what it was that I was doing, and by the time Wednesday of the conference came around, I was starting to get my feet in it. By the second year, I was loaded for bear. I knew what was going on, and I was going there. I was going to kick ass and take some names, right? Now imagine what it'd be like the third year, right? You'd be like my buddy Dave, that's my friend that lives in Omaha. He went to high school for 7 years. Can you imagine how he strutted down the hall his 7th senior year? He knows all about this stuff, right? So we have these delegates that come. Well, it's not like the delegates, you get chosen to be a delegate. I like to say that we're selected. I certainly was selected. I was not elected. I was selected. Came out of the hat. I lost, right? Really, the big losers were you guys. I don't know. I don't think I destroyed AA. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But these delegates don't just come up with the ideas on their own. This is why I asked what these DCMs. These DCMs are district committee members. They come from districts all around the state. Area 41 here in Nebraska. I don't know how many districts you guys got. 31? We have 21 in Iowa. We're area 24. Every area has a number. And not every state is an area, right? Some states have 3 or 4 areas. California, if Keith and Sue were here, I'm sure they can, California's got about 93. Well, no, it can be 93, but I think they seriously have 4 or 5 areas in California. Illinois has 3. So we have these delegates, but where do they get the input from? Because they need guidance from the fellowship. See, one of the things that happens is that we forget that this fellowship, this structure was built on an upside-down triangle, where in corporate America, the further that you go in the triangle, the more power that you have, right? The skinnier the part of the triangle, the more folks you have underneath you that answer to you. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it's just the opposite. The groups are at the top, right? There's 2.5 million of us at the top. And you get down to where you're one of those 14 alcoholic trustees, you got 2.5 million people telling you what to do, right? It's an inverted thing. But one of the common things that happens, that I see happen in AA, is that when we become delegates, people start to worship us. They start to worship, because we're delegates, we have some sort of profound wisdom and a respect that comes with that. That's often, I'm not lying, am I, Charlie? Oh my God, this is Rick. This is Del. I wish I could tell you guys how many people I've met who were a delegate 20 years ago, and they still introduce themselves to me and say, I was a panel 23 delegate. And I'm like, big deal. I'm a dredge operator, right? It's not a part of my identity. And so, because it's not a part of my identity, I need you people to tell me what to do as a delegate. And that's where the DCMs come into play. See, those 20 or 21 DCMs in Iowa, we get together 3 or 4 times a year with the delegate, and we talk about stuff. And the delegate gets a feel of what the fellowship wants in our area. Now, those DCMs, if we're following things right, they're not just making stuff up. Because every month or so, they're having a meeting with all of the GSR, all the general service representatives from the groups are getting together, and they're talking with the delegate about stuff, besides the picnics and the banquets and this kind of thing. And so that this general service conference is a living, breathing entity. And in this first concept, it's saying that it always has to come from our fellowship, from our collective conscience. And it's not a big jump to get it. Our GSRs, Bill Wilson wrote in this manual, is the most important job in AA. Because that's where the voice of the group, that's where the voice of all of us starts to get carried. to direct those trustees. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing, although most of us don't understand the importance of it. The second concept says the General Service Conference of AA has become, for nearly every practical purpose, the active voice and the effective conscience of our whole society in its world affairs. That's a real fancy talk, right? You think that's bad. It gets worse. Think about it. The conference, for every practical purpose, has become the voice for our world service. There's 1,200 groups in Iowa. Okay? Can you imagine, without that General Service Conference, how could AA conduct its world affairs? I mean, imagine just the 1,200 groups in Iowa trying to run the show. Oh, my word. Oh, geez. It's a train wreck. Right? And so this conference has to be responsible for conducting our world affairs. This is an important thing because I've been saying for years, since I was a delegate, that we hear stuff and we see things and we meet people that are concerned about the future of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm one of them. I truly am one of them. And it doesn't take a rocket science once we start to understand all three parts of the triangle and we get involved in general service, that this thing is literally bulletproof from any outside entity. There is no outside entity that can touch Alcoholics Anonymous. We're like Superman. The only problem is we're also the kryptonite. And if this thing gets brought down, it's going to get brought down from within us, not from outside of us. And so that conference is essential for us to stay intact and to conduct these services of what we need to carry into our future. Because we can't, as individual groups, we can't possibly do that. Somebody has to be responsible for this stuff. Somebody has to be responsible for producing the literature that we use. Somebody has to be. And the conference is going to take that task. Now, it goes even further down the hill because the conference is then, for lack of a better word, it's going to direct the trustees on what to do, right? And so this conference, and remember the first concepts, the conference, the delegates are really just a reflection of all of us. So now all these delegates are going to get together in New York, and they're going to become the conference, which is going to become responsible for us in our world affairs. It's really simple to think that what happens is, because of the way this is set up, that when a delegate goes to New York, and we get every year in the spring around Valentine's Day, our delegates receive the proposed agenda items that they will wrestle with at the General Service Conference. Have any of you been fortunate enough to ever see that stuff? Back in the old days, before we had compact discs, it used to come out in a hard copy. It's like 1,000 pages, 800 pages, right? With all the agenda items and the background information that goes into this. And so there's a whole bunch of information that goes on. And so what we get together and we discuss it. We have a regional forum here. We're in the West Central region. There's 8 regions in the United States and Canada. We here in Iowa and Nebraska are in the West Central region. Down where John lives, they're in the Southwestern region. And so we get together when this stuff comes out. This year we met up in Minneapolis the first weekend of March. And we sat with the 8 delegates from our region and our regional trustee, and we talked about these issues. And they get a feel of how the folks in our region feel about different issues. One of the things that we think happens in AA is we think that these people that we're sending to this conference, that we instruct them on how to vote on stuff, right? We believe that we send them to New York with clear-cut instructions on how they are to vote on this. Now, am I making any sense to you guys? Let me ask you something. I'm kind of a bullhead, all right? I'm a blue-collar worker. I'm not very smart. I'm not stupid, but I'm not educated. I'm not accountable to any human being. And I'm not smiling when I say that. My wife and I sometimes have to negotiate some stuff. I'm close to being accountable to her. But the truth is, I'm not accountable to any human being. Now, think about this. If we're going to select a delegate and we're going to instruct them on how they must vote, well, you can just take my name right out of the damn hat, right? What we're doing is we're making a segue here into the third concept, which we'll get to. I don't do well with being told what to do. How about you, John? You like it? Yeah. Huh? No, he don't like it. He was offended that I even asked. I don't like being told what to do. Right? See, our second tradition talks about there being trusted servants. You ever heard that? Right? You ever notice in the traditions that the short form of the second tradition is longer than the long form of the second tradition? It is. Check it out. The long form of the second tradition doesn't have the tag that say our leaders are but trusted servants. The short form of that has it. And trusted servants of what? Are they trusted servants to our fellowship? Are they trusted servants to the future of Alcoholics Anonymous? Are they trusted servants of God? I believe we're all of those. As a delegate, people would thank me for your service to us, Rick. And I'd look at them and say, look, I ain't serving you. You've already had your chance. Anything I'm doing is to serve the people that haven't found our message yet. That's what I'm serving. See, I'm not your servant. That don't sit well with me. Because that means you're going to tell me what to do, and I don't like being told what to do. Which brings us to our third concept. Uh-oh, I lost my place. To ensure effective leadership, we should endow each element of AA, the conference, the General Service Board, and its service corporations, staffs, committees, and executives with a traditional right of decision. So every element of our conference has a right of decision. And I said earlier that these are principles, these are spiritual principles that we can apply in every area of our life. I'd like to throw something out to you. Let's say that I'm going to be a delegate to the General Service Conference, and I become familiar with our steps and our traditions and our concepts, and I think that the traditions and concepts are real important for me to follow when I'm in a group business meeting or an area assembly or something like this. But I don't really believe that they're all that necessary for me to incorporate into my life at home or at work or when I'm driving down Interstate 80. Am I making sense to you guys? No, think about it. If I don't look at these principles as being spiritual in their nature, and if they're spiritual in their nature, that means they can be applied anywhere, not just within the AA circle. That's not within that circle that's around the triangle, but everywhere. Practice these principles in all of our affairs. And if I'm not practicing these principles in all of my affairs, what makes me think that I'm going to be able to practice them when I get to the General Service Conference? Or when I get to an area assembly? But on the other hand, if I'm trying to practice these principles in all of my affairs, at home and at work, and when some jerk cuts me off. Can I tell you guys a funny story? remember that we're talking about the third concept, because this is who I am. I'm going to tell you a story of who I am, right? I'm pretty well, comparatively, right? But a couple of years ago, my wife and I were going down to southern Iowa where my sisters live. And we're about 6 miles from home, and there's a it's a crossroads of a national highway and our county road. And I'm sitting at the stop sign. There's some guy coming down the road, right? And he got his turn signal on. And he's turning right. Well, I'm just easing out into the intersection like farmers do in Iowa so that I can just get in right behind him and keep going. Well, it freaks him out, and he stops. So now I'm stopped in the middle of a highway, and I'm waving for him to go ahead, and he's waving at me to do something else, right? I'm thinking, whoa, bro, now you done crossed the line. You don't want to cross, right? So I get right up on his butt, right? My wife's going, Rick, quit it. Stop it. I said, yeah, I'm looking in his rearview mirror, right? She says, leave him alone. He's driving a cube, for crying out loud. He's got enough problems, right? And he's got Florida tags on his plate. So I follow him for about 5 or 6 miles, right? Showed him my tattoos so he knew I was bad and all this crap, right? And we go into this little town where there's an Amish store about 100 miles from where the site happened. And we go into the store with my sisters, right? And we come out. And this little town, that this store in, literally has about 120 people in it, right? But this store is huge. People come from all around. And I'm getting in my car. I'm taking stuff that Chris, my wife, has bought. I'm putting it in the trunk of the car, and I turn around, and what do I see? That cube with the Florida tags, right? So Chris gets in the car, and it just so happens that this guy and his wife are getting in their car, and they're leaving right in front of us. And we get to the stop sign, and I'm looking in his rearview mirror, and I can see him look back, and I go, I'm a jerk, right? Now, I did all that for fun. Now, the first 5 miles wasn't fun, right? But after that, I was just having some fun, and I waved at the guy afterwards. So see, the application of these principles happens on the highway as well as in the General Service Conference. It happens at work as well as at the General Service Conference. And if I'm not applying these things, if I'm applying these things at home and at work, it's going to be much easier for me to apply them at the General Service Conference. It's just going to be the way that I live. So let me talk about this right of decision. I don't go there. I go there with information. We go there with information as to how you people feel about things, but I'm not instructed to vote on something. Because on the floor of the General Service Conference, you're going to find out later on that we discuss things. And there's information that comes to the table that can make us change the way that we feel about something. Right? Perhaps it's a pamphlet. Here in our region, we seem to think that we have an ample amount of pamphlets in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? That you get on the floor of the service conference and you listen to people and they describe the need for an outreach pamphlet to reach people in certain places. And we're there to vote for Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. And sometimes that information is pretty overwhelming and pretty convicting. And it made me vote that we needed a couple of pamphlets, right? I had that right of decision. Even though I know the census of our area is that we don't need any more pamphlets, I just got to go back and tell them what I did, right? So here's how this works in the real world. I'm kind of a boss where I work. Don't get me wrong. Right? That doesn't mean I sit in an office. My office is a boat. I run a sand dredge, right? And I'm basically a one-man crew, but if a conveyor belt goes down or something and we need it up in a hurry, some of the guys that drive ready-mix trucks will come and help me. My job's very dangerous, okay? Some stuff I won't let guys do by themselves. I just won't let them do it because we don't need anybody getting killed. But there's some stuff that guys can do. And so we're going to use the example of replacing a conveyor belt. And I have 3 or 4 guys that have worked with me over the years that they understand the procedures that you change a conveyor belt. They understand our safety policies. They understand time-proven methods. Let's call it ways that we traditionally will change a conveyor belt. Am I making sense to you guys? And I'll say to them, look, you guys take care of this belt, all right? I got a problem out on the boat while you guys are monkeying with this belt. I'm going to go out on the boat and work on some stuff, all right? I'll check on you in a little bit, right? How many of you guys you folks are bosses where you work? Does it ever get irritated when people come up and ask you simple questions about stuff they've done 50 times? So that pisses you off too, right? Like, make a decision, dude, right? Make a decision, right? You're doing it. Look, I'm not going to scold you for thinking on your feet, right? You're up here, you're doing this, you're doing the job. I'm trusting you to do the job. Do it how you see fit. Just stay within our safety policy, stay within our safety procedures. Don't go trying to reinvent the wheel, all right? Okay? If you want to try something a little bit different, that's all right. That's how we learn how to get more effective, but basically stay within it. Am I making sense to you? That's how it works out on the farm, right? And guess what? Have you ever worked for somebody? Oh, man. Those guys that I was an iron worker for the first 8 years I was out of high school, and then I got the job that I got now. And I don't mind being supervised, but don't manage me. You understand what I'm saying? Don't stand over. I told one foreman when I was an iron worker, I was about 21 or 22, a punk, right? And he's watching me work, and I turned around and I said, look, if you're interested, it's an extra large. And he said, what? And I said, my shirt size. You're obviously trying to see the tag on my shirt, right? Get off my back. Right? Don't stand over me and watch me work. You ever had somebody that stands over you and tells you how to do everything? They're micromanaging what it is that you're doing. Frustrating, isn't it? Well, in their foresight of making these concepts, they knew that in order for us to have effective leadership, people that weren't patsies, people that didn't lay down, people that were able to think on principle and act on behalf of the principle and not necessarily follow the beat of everybody else's drum, that we couldn't have that kind of leadership if we didn't give them the right to decide stuff on their own. I hope I'm making sense to you guys. And you know what? You get a crew of guys or ladies. I'm sorry, I'm old. I'm not very politically correct. I think of a crew of guys at work, right? But I mean folks. I should just say you get a crew of folks. I'm getting better, ain't I? Folks, right? You get a crew of folks and you say, look, here's what we need you to do. Here's what needs to get done. You guys have been trained. You know what to do. Go do it. Right? And then we show up and I'm saying, hey, why you got that come along tight off there? All it takes is, well, boss, we found this X brace busted over here and we didn't think that was good to pull off of, so we just kind of rigged things up, got in a couple extra chokers and pulled it off of here. And I'm going, you know what? Good thinking. Good thinking. Atta boy. I'll buy you a malt today, right? Right? Thanks for not calling me for that. You handled it. You stepped up. You handled it. When I asked you, you told me why you did it, and it was a legitimate reason for doing it. That's a sign of leadership, right? Thinking on their own, following the principles, doing what they're doing. And so our servants, we need that. We need that ability to be able to do that. Our fourth concept is at all responsible levels, we ought to maintain a traditional right of participation, allowing a reasonable proportion to the responsibility that each must discharge. Whew. A reasonable amount of participation, right? Now oh my God, how many lighters you got, girl? She's either a serious smoker or a pyro, one or the other. My word's good, too. After we talk about this one, we'll take a break, all right? Because there's folks that want to smoke and things like that. So, but there's this right of participation. A lot of big words, right? Well, the way this conference kind of works is that the delegates get together, and we got all these committees. We got a corrections committee, a PI committee, a treatment committee, an archives committee, policy, finance committee, a treatment committee, 12 or 13 of them, right? And there's usually 7 or 8 delegates that sit on each committee. And these committees go through these proposed agenda items, right? And they decide which ones are necessary, which ones ain't. And then they come to the conference. The conference starts on Sunday. And on Wednesday is when the conference starts to really get into hashing things out, where the discussion and the voting takes place. I served on the 59th and 60th service conferences, the 2 longest service conferences in the history of our conference. The 59th conference, we were supposed to get done at Friday night at 5 o'clock. We got done Saturday morning at 2:30. And that's when I knew that the hands of AA, that the future of AA was firmly in the hands of God. At that conference, I knew it. I also understood at that conference how volatile and how fragile we are, but that God's hands are firmly right underneath us, helping us along the way. So at any rate, so how this works is that the delegates, the conference, says we need a piece of literature, for instance, right? So what we vote, everybody says, yep, 2/3 majority says, yep, we need the literature. Trustees make the piece of literature. Well, the trustees don't make the piece of literature, do they? No. They got staff members and stuff that do this work. Now imagine any of you's ever get a little bit mad at the company that you work for because nobody ever asks you what you think about stuff, right? Or how about your dad, right? When it's still snowing and he makes you go out and clean the sidewalk off. Jesus, Dad, it's still snowing, right? I don't care, go do it. Right? Don't let it get built up so high. It's easier to do it 3 times than do it once. Oh, Dad, that's just stupid, right? He wasn't asking what I thought about it. Well, what happens is that becomes a workforce that's disgruntled, right? Nobody cares. And what I try to do when fellows work with me at work, and I've already told you that I work on water. It's a dangerous job. When we're out on the water, it's my way. And that's just the way it has to be out there. Because I've got 25 years of experience. I'm not going to let some guy get hurt or killed because he thinks he knows what he's doing, right? But what we'll do before we go on the water is we'll talk about the work that we have to do, the pipeline that we have to replace, or the electric lines that we have to replace. And I'll sit with the 2 or 3 guys that are going to do this work with me and say, here's what I'm thinking. This is how I think we ought to do it. What do you guys think? And they're all like kind of scared of Rick, right? Because he's the boss, right? Well, after they do it a few times, they figure out Rick ain't the boss. Rick's running wrenches too, right? Rick getting wet too. Rick's part of the crew. To tell you the truth, I don't think they're going to come up with any ideas that I haven't already come up with in 25 years. But because of this principle, I know that it makes them feel valuable and feel like they have some input into what we're doing. And they feel like they're an integral part of the team, and they in fact are. And they become happier workers. And they feel satisfied with their job, and they feel like they're making an investment in their job. And Bill and Bernie had the foresight with this 4th concept to see that those staff members are going to get their butts worked off, right? So those staff members should also have a vote in our conference. So our staff members, the people that you call that are sitting at the PI desk or at the literature desk or at the treatment desk, those folks are voting members of the conference. And as a matter of fact, they have more experience with the conference than any of the rest of us. Delegates only have at the most. This is my 2nd year, right? Alcoholic Class B trustees, there's 14 Class B trustees, alcoholic trustees. The most they have is they had 2 years as a delegate, and they're maybe in their 4th year as a trustee. The Class A non-alcoholic trustees, how many of you people knew that there were non-alcoholic trustees? Good, everybody knew that. A lot of folks don't really understand why we have them. Just a little sidebar, the reason that we do have them is because these people are experts in their field. Whether it's psychiatry, whether it's corrections. One of our great chairman of the board came from Texas. Was the head of the Department of Corrections in Texas about 20 years ago. Doctors, attorneys, people involved in the treatment field, preachers. Ward Ewing was our just past chairman of the board, a Class A non-alcoholic trustee, and he was a minister, a clergyman. These people are experts in their field, and they bring something to help with this guidance. But there's an even more practical reason why we need them. Because in our world services, we're called on to do things. Let's say the World Health Organization is having a worldwide convention in Helsinki, and alcoholism, it don't stop at the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. It's a worldwide epidemic. The guy that was my sponsor was part of this very small contingent of members of Alcoholics Anonymous and went to communist Russia in the 1980s to find out if Alcoholics Anonymous would work in Russia. And he got there and they found out it had been there for years. It was just underground. And so we get requests from people like the World Health Organization to send folks to these conventions and these world conferences. One of us can't go. Think about it. It's a public venue. We can't go and act on behalf of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we need those non-alcoholic trustees to go on our behalf, right? Our tradition of anonymity prevents us from doing that. So we need these people. And so this fourth concept, this right of participation, has to do with the staff workers, the staff members that are actually doing the work, feeling like they have the right to say on what these votes are going. These people, some of them have 20 years experience of being at the conference. Some of them are at their 20th conference, right? And they know some stuff, and we're lucky to have them. But imagine if we didn't allow them to speak, and all they had to do was do the work that we told them to do. When I was a young kid, an 18-year-old iron worker, I got told almost every day, "Kid, you're getting paid from here down. You're getting paid from the neck down." I didn't mind that till I was about 21 when I started feeling like I knew something about this trade, right? And at that point, I kind of felt like, well, maybe you ought to ask me how we ought to rig this up or how we ought to set this building out. And I had some foremen that would ask, and I loved those guys. And then I had some guys that still said, "You do it my way or the highway." And I didn't like those guys, and I worked with them with contempt. And in order to keep the harmony and the unity within our fellowship and within this conference, participation, Bill wrote, is the key to harmony. Our fourth concept ensures that those folks that work at the desks, that they get a say-so in how we do things. So let's take about a 10 or 15 minute break, and if anybody comes back, we'll pick up there, okay? Thank you. Go ahead and push play if you want to. All right. Everybody eat? Okay. Fifth concept. The fifth concept says that throughout our structure, a traditional right of appeal ought to prevail, so that minority opinion will be heard and personal grievances receive careful consideration. The first time I went to an area assembly, I saw something really funny. Remember when I went, my group said, we think you ought to go to Cedar Rapids and then come back and tell us. And part of what I reported to them was I saw the damnedest thing happen. These folks, these couple hundred people, sat and talked about whether we should stop having a newsletter because it was a money drain on our treasurer at the area level. And they argued it back and forth, and people were slobbering and frothing, and it's crazy, right? And then they voted, and it passed. And the next issue was whether we should send a surplus of money that we had in the Treasury to GSO. And they argued and did everything for about another 4 hours, and then they voted. And they decided to do something, and then the chairperson said, is there anybody in the minority that would like to speak? And the two guys went to the microphone. And what they said was very powerful and very strong. And then somebody said, Mr. Chair, I'd like to recall the question. And I'm telling my group about this, that they voted, and then a couple people changed their mind and they decided to vote again, and the vote went entirely the opposite way with the unanimous vote. And I'd never seen anything like that happen before. I thought that was just weird, right? Like you vote and you vote, that's it, right? Winners keepers, losers weepers, right? Well, that's not true. And our fifth concept has even more teeth than that. Because if we start to understand what the fifth concept, appeal, is about, is that's about, it can be to the degree that our conference has made a decision that one of us in the conference feels it may be grievous to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Just because 130 people vote in favor of something and one person votes against it doesn't necessarily ensure that the 130 are right. Am I making sense to you? And in this fifth concept, Bill says not only do we have the right to appeal an issue that we feel may be grievous to AA. Grievous is a big word. That's not a good word. That means death. We're going to die. He says not only do we have the right, but we have the responsibility to do that. We have the responsibility to do that. And that takes a little getting used to. We try to do this at home. Now, my mom and dad didn't do it, right? They weren't too concerned about a minority opinion. It sounded a lot like, well, when you get a damn job and move out, you can do whatever the hell you want. But as long as you're living here, right, you're going to do it this way. But I've tried to incorporate these things into my life, into my with my kids, right? And we've tried to teach them that, just because everybody jumps off a bridge, that don't mean it's the right thing to do. And it is possible that me and Mom could be making a mistake here. And if you feel that it's really grievous, you have the right to bring that up. And I remember the first time that my daughter Jessica did that. I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, but her mother and I had a difference of opinion on, quite a few things. And by the way, I'm not her biological father, but I started raising her when she was 6. And I'm her and her little brother's dad. And when Jessica was 17, her mom and I separated for a few weeks. And Jessica came to our house, my house, over to my mom's house, and she said, Dad, we need to talk. And I said, okay. And we're sitting out on the patio, and she started to tell me essentially that she wasn't 12 years old anymore, and that there had been some decisions made that she felt were grievous, and that she was in fact a young woman, and that she could handle herself in nearly any situation that came along. And that at that point I said, well, I'm glad that you think. She said, hold on a second, Dad. I'm talking. You're going to listen. Now that kind of sucks. When you've tried to give this principle to these kids and then they turn around and use the sumbitch on you, right? It ain't right. I didn't expect that, right? I was thinking more in the lines of a teacher or something like that, but no, it turned on me. And I've told this story several times, and I was not a, I seen a sign in a therapist's office one time that said, being a parent means allowing your heart to walk around outside of your body. And I was watching this girl, and it was bothering me. And I tried to curtail her activities, and I tried to protect her, so to speak, from her mistakes. And on that evening, we came to an understanding that she had a right to appeal. And it came like this. Dad, I don't want to lose you. I love you, and I want to be with you the rest of my life. But Dad, you got to quit treating me like I'm 12. You've been making some mistakes here, and it's pushing me away. And I said, I'll try. I swear to you, I'll do my best to try. And she said, good, I love you. She hugged me. And I said, well, you want to eat? Grandma's got some cake in there. You want a piece of cake? And she says, no. She says, I got to go. I got an itch on my back. She says, I got to go. She said, me and Tara's going camping with Billy and Steve tonight. And well, and in a moment I figured out this probably wasn't the first time she'd went camping with a couple of boys. It was just the first time that I had the information, right? And she made a fifth concept appeal, and I'm not, to a degree, and I'm not going to tell you what all went on through the course of the next few hours, but I'll tell you this: that since that night, and that was a long time ago, she's 34 years old now, that I've never had an argument with her. Since that night, I've never had an argument with her nor her brother. Never raised my voice to either one of them since that night. I've seen that God was going to take care of them with or without me. And her bringing that appeal to me opened up a whole venue of spiritual awareness that I never knew existed. So that's what the fifth concept is about, appealing something that's grievous. Whether we've made a big mistake here. We've made a mistake and we need to correct it. Now, the interesting thing, to bore you with a little bit of jargon, is that at the conference level, to my knowledge, that's only happened twice. Bill W. did it at some point in the 60s, in the early 60s. He actually did a fifth concept appeal. We're not really sure. I don't remember the particulars, and we're not really sure how that got handled. We think it kind of got swept under the rug because the year before I became a delegate, 4 or 5 trustees filed a fifth concept appeal based on a conference action, right? Am I making sense to you? The conference had made a decision. A few months later, these 4 or 5 trustees, if Ken was here, Ken could answer because Ken was one of them. They filed a fifth concept appeal. And then what we found out was we didn't know what to do with it. We didn't have a set procedure to do that. Isn't that strange? We had the principle, but we didn't have the mechanical tools to do it. And so the second year that I was a delegate, the conference committee, I think on policy, started to put together the mechanics of how to do this tool, and it was, we didn't come anywhere close. It was not, and I'm sure that by now they've come up with those tools. They have the procedure in place. But we always appeal to the next highest authority. And so those are the mechanics of it all. But the important thing is that all of us have a responsibility. And at work, you know, I was an iron worker for the first 8 years that I was out of high school. I said that. Dangerous job. And that was back before, you know, we didn't use man lifts very often, and we never used lanyards, you know, and we did a lot of silly stuff. But the bottom line of all of it was that if you didn't feel safe doing something, you didn't do it, right? Doesn't matter what the boss says, right? And that same thing carries over true now that I'm in the mining industry and we do things and you know, and all of the guys that work around me know that if I'm asking them to do anything that isn't safe or doesn't make sense, that they have a responsibility. They don't only have the right, but they got the responsibility to say, Rick, slow down. We don't need to be in that big of a hurry. We don't need to cut corners safety-wise. Am I making sense to you guys? That's the same principle of our fifth concept appeal. To be able to appeal to that next higher authority, to the boss or to my boss and say, look, we're doing stuff out there that is crazy, all to save time so that we can make more money or make more sand. Somebody's going to get killed. This is a grievous, we're making grievous mistakes. We've been lucky so far, but this isn't going to last forever, and those guys have the responsibility to act on that. So that's what the fifth concept's about. The sixth concept, I'm looking for one here that I can read the long form. Well, yeah, here we go. This will work. The sixth concept, on behalf of AA as a whole, our General Service Conference has the principal responsibility for the maintenance of our world's services, and it's traditionally has the final decision respecting large matters of general policy and finance. But the conference also recognizes that the chief initiative and the active responsibility. I'm about 3/4 of the way done with it, right? Did any of you people understand any of that? Because I don't, right? That's why the short form is so much easier. I just wanted to point out to you what the long form of these things are, right? And for our intent here of just of information, the short form works quite well for us to get an idea of the principle. So the conference recognizes that the chief initiative and active responsibility in most world service matters should be exercised by the trustee members of the conference, acting as the General Service Board. So it's almost like we're looking back at the stuff I talked about in the first concept and the second concept, that we can't have the several 100,000 groups that make up AA in the United States and Canada being conducting our world service affairs. It has to come to a small group of people. And we recognize that the trustees are going to be the folks that are going to be doing that. They're the folks that are going to be overseeing the policy. They're going to be overseeing the workings of things. They're going to be overseeing the workings of the General Service Office, the corporate committees, AAWS and Grapevine Inc. These guys, these folks are going to be the ones that are going to be primarily responsible for that. Now, just because they have that, the active responsibility, doesn't mean necessarily that they have free rein over things, because I'm I'm trying to think about whether to say this now or wait. I'll just say it. I'll say it now because it's a principle. They have the responsibility of doing things, right? But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily an issue of the cat's away and the mice will play. Okay? The conference gives them the responsibility of doing this. You ever be at work and the boss goes away on vacation, right? And then comes back and wants to know why you ain't got all this stuff done, right? When he never really told you what it was that he wanted done in the first place, right? He's just pissed off because he's been on vacation. He comes back and it looks like you guys ain't been working hard enough, right? Well, this sixth concept, in a way, kind of says that, you know what? The trustee's going to be responsible for this stuff, but the conference is still going to be here, right? The conference is going to, we're giving you the responsibility and the general initiative to take care of these issues, but you're going to have to report back to us. We're going to be in touch with you. We have active committees that continue to go. We'll be back next year to see how you're doing things. But we recognize that the trustees, are going to have to take responsibility and the initiative on this stuff. Am I making sense to you? Okay. I'm kind of rushing through this so that if we have some questions about some things, we can take care of that, if that's all right with you guys. Okay. So the seventh tradition says the charter and the seventh concept, the charter and the bylaws of the General Service Board are legal instruments empowering the trustees to manage and conduct World Service affairs. The conference charter is not a legal document. It relies upon tradition and the AA purse for final effectiveness. We're talking about a couple of different things here, okay? We're talking about legal instruments, right? The trustees' charter, the trustees' bylaws. These are legal instruments. We are a corporation. Alcoholics Anonymous is a corporation. And as I understand it, the law, pardon me? They're making eyes at each other up here. She just passed him a note that said, I like you, do you like me? All right. So the laws of New York are going to require, because that's where our corporation is based, going to require that we have legal documents, right? I'd like to read for you guys just a little bit out of the bylaws of the board, okay? The General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous Incorporated, right? Alcoholics Anonymous, Inc., right? Now has but one purpose, that of serving the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is in effect an agency created and now designated by the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous to maintain services for those who should be seeking through Alcoholics Anonymous the means for arresting the disease of alcoholism through the application to their own lives in whole or in part of the 12 steps which constitute the recovery program upon which the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is founded. The 12 steps are as follows. So they're in those bylaws. They're saying this is what the General Service Board is about, right? This is what it's about. Its primary purpose, one purpose, serving the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous so that folks who want to find a way to sobriety can find it. And we can get distracted by all kinds of other things, right? We can get, sometimes as a delegate, I would have to ask myself, why are we talking about this? What does this have to do with carrying our message to somebody that's dying from alcoholism? I don't get it. I don't understand why we're spinning our wheels on this stuff. And sometimes I fear that we lose track of that occasionally. That when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of it, this is what we're here for. Bill, in the formation of our traditions, in the sixth tradition, warned us about feudal disputes over money and property and prestige, things of the ego, things of possession, things of value that we may have that may divert us from our primary purpose of carrying our message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And here in this concept, we're seeing that when I read the bylaws, that it's very clear of what the purpose of the General Service Board is. And there's legal instruments there. There's legal instruments. The charter and the bylaws are legal instruments. Now, the conference charter is not a legal instrument. It's not. It is based on the power of our traditions. And if push comes to shove, the power of the purse. Right? The power of the purse is a big deal. Just in case there would happen to be some sort of a funky, so to speak, a coup d'etat, that the General Service Board decided to go off into left field and start making a whole bunch of crazy decisions. They can't do it. We can't do much without money. So in that regard, our groups still have the power. See, there's like a check and a balance here, if that makes sense to you guys. That we can make all kinds of policies, we can decide to do all kinds of stuff, but if we don't have the money to do it, we can't do it. So in that case, the power of the purse is an interesting thing, that the groups could shut down the money that they're sending to New York. Now there's a little side issue that I'll talk about. Alcoholics Anonymous is getting to be close to a $20 million a year business. Right? When I was a delegate, it took about $16 million a year to run the General Service Office. About half of that money came from our literature sales, primarily our big book. Right? You guys know how long it took to sell 1 million big books? The first 1 million big books. You know when we sold the 1 millionth big book? No? Sometime 72, 73, 74. Somewhere in there. Somewhere in the early, mid, 72 or 73 or 74. It took from 1939 to then to sell 1 million big books. We sell well over 1 million in a year now. Okay. So, if half of our money is coming from our literature sales, that can make it a little bit difficult for us as a fellowship to have the power of the purse. Okay? And this has been an ongoing thing in AA for a long time. That when I became delegate, the AAWS and the General Service Office raised the price of the big book from $6 to $8 within the first few months of me being a delegate. And it happened, we found out about it through an email that essentially we weren't supposed to see. We being delegates. And it kind of just went like wildfire in a 12-hour period. Every delegate knew about it, and we was pissed, right? And the knee-jerk reaction to that is because there's an attitude that exists in Alcoholics Anonymous between us, meaning us being the folks that are in these chairs, and them being the folks that work at the General Service Office and are in the General Service Board and stuff. And there is no us and them. There's only us. Believe me, I've met almost everybody that works at the General Service Office, and there's not one single one of those people that wake up in the morning and rub their hands together and say, let's see how I can screw up AA today. Right? There's nobody that's saying, let's see how I can bring this thing down. Right? There's nobody on the General Service Board that's intentionally trying to destroy AA. The truth of the matter is our groups weren't supplying the funds to keep them operating. So they had to raise the price of the big book in order to keep money coming in, because there's laws that are involved through the state of New York, and they got pensions that they have to, and this goes way beyond my head, right? They start talking about this stuff, and I'm duck hunting or something. I go to my happy place, right? But the truth is there's a lot of financial responsibility that goes here. And then you start talking about us being a not-for-profit thing, and then it's how much money can be in the bank over any period of time. There has to be 6 months operating expenses there, but if it gets over 9 months, then they're in trouble with the IRS, and it gets confusing. So when the price of the big book got raised, the knee-jerk reaction of our fellowship was, well, screw them. We'll quit sending money. No, don't quit sending money, because if we quit sending money, that means that the price of the book has to be raised. If you want to show them, if you want to have the power of the purse, start flooding GSO with money. Flood it with money. If we flood it with money, then we have to damn near, not they, we have to damn near give the books away. The power of the purse is an amazing thing to look at. Something that we in AA we've talked for years about being self-supporting, and is our literature sales, is that part of being self-supporting? And Mr. Wilson wrote some stuff to where he believed that we would always need the literature sales. I suppose he's right. But I just want to give you guys something to think about as far as the power of the purse. There's about 2.5 million people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Let's say there's 2 million, right? In the United States and Canada. 2 million people that are served by our General Service Office, AAWS, Grapevine Inc. And just for good round numbers, let's say that it costs $20 million a year to operate that office. Half of the money, give or take, is going to come from literature sales. Now, I'm going to say something here that's going to be mind-boggling to you. Now, we're never going to get all of the people to contribute to the seventh tradition, just like we're never going to get all of the groups, right? Well, we got 45% of our groups contribute to GSO through our seventh tradition. Somewhere in that area, 40, 45%, maybe a little higher, somewhere between 45 and 50 on a good year. So let's just say half. I want you to think about something. So if half of those 2 million people, which is 1 million of us, sent $20 a year to the General Service Office, we'd be entirely self-supporting. $20 a year. $20 a year. Right? Think about that. 40 cents a week. 40 cents a week. And we'd be self-supporting. That's just half of us doing it. You know, that's the power of the purse. So then we don't have to rely upon the sale of literature. And that our fellowship then truly is self-supporting and truly does have the power of the purse. I have a fear, a concern, that because there's books that are... How many of you guys have seen the red big books running around? Those aren't produced by AAWS. Those aren't published by AAWS. We lost the copyright to the first edition several years ago, and some other folks are publishing that book. And AA doesn't get the money, and they sell those books for, what, $4 or $5? Considerably cheaper than ours are. And I believe that there's a line where our fellowship is not going to pay $12 for a blue big book when they can get a red one that says essentially the same thing for $5. And when that happens, we're in trouble. And the whole thing can go down. Remember I said earlier, we're bulletproof from the outside. We're the ones that's going to bring this down. And I believe it's going to be our continued ignorance and apathy about our principles and the way things work. And so I kind of digressed here about the power of the purse and these kind of things, but this is stuff that I think about, right? This charter is a big deal, right? It relies upon tradition for us to maintain it. And you know what? We don't ever have to worry too much about the trustees getting out of whack too much, because we as a conference approve a slate of trustees at the conference every year. First year that I was a delegate, there was, when I mean a slate, they bring the names of all the trustees to the conference and we approve them. It's rubber stamp, boom. And they bring a slate to us, and a delegate on the other side of the room says, what happens if we don't approve this slate? And a trustee that was sitting about 2 rows in front of me said, well, we have to approve the slate. We've never not approved the slate. We have to. And another voice from a delegate on the other side of the room said, we don't have to do nothing. And that's when I went, oh my God, this thing's falling apart right in front of me. We're coming apart at the seams. And this was on Friday afternoon. And I sat in my chair and I wept. I wept because I realized there had been such a disconnect, a perceived disconnect between our delegates and the conference and our General Service Board. There was an attitude that there was secrecy going on within the Board of Trustees and things that they were all within their rights of doing, right? Because of the legal documents, the legal chart, they were within their rights. But traditionally, the delegates didn't believe they were within their rights. And the delegates were calling the charter where we have the right to censure, I think is the word, where we can decide if you're a trustee. No, you're not. No, you're not a trustee anymore. We just decided, no, you're out. And that came in the discussion on that floor. And when that delegate said, we don't have to do nothing, it was the attitude was like a kid standing up to a bully and saying, no, I'm not taking it anymore. We don't have to do this. And so all of a sudden, through that discord and the power of the tradition, over the course of the next 2 hours, I think that conference started to heal. And there started to be an increased commitment to transparency and to trust. And that all came from that, not a legal document, wasn't a legal document, but it was a spiritual document called the Conference Charter. So anyway, I kind of left the room there for a little bit. Concept 8. The trustees are the principal planners and administrators of overall policy and finance. They have custodial oversight of the separately incorporated and constantly active services, exercising this through their ability to elect all of the directors of these entities. Okay. This one I'm a little weak on it, but I think I know enough to be really dangerous, okay? So the trustees have custodial oversight, right? Think about a custodian. They take care of things, right? That's what a custodian does. I went to a small school. There was 50 kids in my senior class. Superintendent's the boss of the school, right? Right? A lot of people say, well, maybe, but the principal's really the guy that runs the school, right? Not at Louisa Muscatine Community High School in the 1970s, they didn't. A guy named Dick Brockert ran that school. He was the custodian, okay? You could go to Mr. Thompson's office all you wanted to, but you did not want to get Dick pissed off at you, right? There was kids, the year after I graduated, there was a couple of kids that were seniors that rode their motorcycle. They had dirt bikes, and they rode their motorcycles through the school. Pretty big deal, right? Let me tell you about the respect that this custodian had in these guys. Before they rode through the school, they stopped at the back door, got the garden hose out, and washed the tires off on the bike. Because they knew if they took mud in there, Dick was going to be climbing up their butts in a big way, right? So we're not getting mud in there. So that's what a custodian does. Custodian takes care of things. So we recognize that the trustees are going to be the principal planners, and they're going to they're going to administrate overall policies, right? Right? The overall policies of things. They're going to plan these things and administer them. Now, they always have to report back to the conference, right? Things don't go on behind closed doors. You always got it under theory. There's a transparency. We always want to report back. And they have the custodial oversight of these separate boards, AAWS, which prints most of our literature, right? The 12 and 12, the big book, AAWS takes care of that. Grapevine Inc. is another corporate board, a separate corporate board. So these guys have these people, the trustees, have the custodial oversight to take care of things within them. And they can continue to do that because they The trustees choose the directors. There's a nominating committee, and they pick the directors of these things, right? And so because of that, they have a very active, hands-on position of taking care of things. Whoops, excuse me. It almost sounds like it, and it could potentially have, it could have the potential to be a good old boys club, right? And this is where we have to start trusting folks, that they're picking the best people for the job. See, the conference can't do this stuff. The conference, if somebody wants to be, say, a non-trustee director of the Grapevine, what are we going to do? Get all 93 delegates together for a weekend in New York, and we're going to bring in the people that have sent resumes in to be a non-trustee director, and then we all interview them? No, the trustees have to do that, and we have to trust the trustees to do that. Am I making this clear? That there's directors on these corporate boards, and we don't, as a fellowship, we don't elect them. Right? The trustees do that. And we give them the opportunity to do. We give them the responsibility to do. Now let's go. excuse me. Let's go to concept 9, because this is one that I may talk about this for 15 minutes. Good service leadership at all levels is indispensable for our future functioning and safety. Primary world service leadership, once exercised by the founders, must necessarily be assumed by the trustees. I've often wondered what it was like when Bill Wilson was alive. I mean, even when he handed this thing over and essentially stepped back, 10 or 12 years before he died, I just got to think there probably wasn't too much went on without Bill saying, okay. You know what I'm saying? I just got to think that there just wasn't too much going on without Bill knowing about it, or without Bill weighing in on it, or people advising him, right? And again, he knew that good leadership was going to be absolutely I lost the word I was going to use. It's really important. Yeah. Happens when I start using big words, I get lost really easy. Now let's think about this 9th concept. That leadership, good leadership, is absolutely necessary. It says it right here in this short form. For our future functioning and safety. Future functioning and safety. Now, sometimes I wish that those guys weren't recording stuff, right? Because I say things that make me not be very popular with a lot of people. And I think one of the worst reasons that somebody could get involved in general service is because it would be good for them. I think one of the worst reasons that we can get involved in general service is because it will enhance your sobriety. Besides the concepts, I know a little bit about our basic principles in AA, our traditions and our steps. And as I understand it in the 5th chapter of our book, it says that selfishness and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. And getting involved for general service because it's going to be good for me or it's going to be good for him to get involved, that sure looks a lot like self-centeredness to me. Looks a lot like self-serving to me. The question is, will it be good for the fellowship? Are we putting the best people possible forward at every service level? Are we putting the best person possible forward as our group's GSR? Or are we just putting somebody in there because nobody else wants to do it? Because if I understand how this thing works and the importance of our groups directing the future of AA, then that GSR truly does become the most important job in AA. Because all of those GSRs are going to be the ones that gets the ears of the delegate. And we need the very best people to be able to do that. Our ninth concept insists on that. That if we don't have the best people doing this, it's not safe for us. Being on the other end of this and having served as a delegate, it almost seems to me, and this goes contrary to what I'd said earlier about being about 3-year delegates, being 3-year delegates, I actually think I'd make a pretty damn good GSR right now. Right? Because I think I understand what the hell's going on here, where most GSRs don't. But you know what? There's all kinds of folks running around that knows what's going on. And what we do is we take some poor person that's been sober a year and a half, barely has an understanding of our most basic principles in AA, the steps, barely has an understanding of those. And we tell them things like service work keeps you sober. Service work does not keep me sober. Service work pisses me off. The power of God keeps me sober. Nothing short of that. Service to Alcoholics Anonymous can be a way to take that awakened spirit into the world to be of service. Service does not keep me sober. Does not. The future of Alcoholics Anonymous depends upon us choosing those leaders wisely. I was sober 10 or 12 years when I became a GSR. Perfect. Just about the time I was getting bored with working the steps. Right? And I didn't even want to be involved in it. I was going to quit. I didn't tell you this story. I was going to quit. I went to a couple of district meetings and an assembly, and I got to see the insanity that we call general service. You ever been to an assembly? Huh? Grown-up people should not act that way. And I come home and I called my sponsor. I said, these people are crazy. He said, I know. I said, seriously, they're nuts. They are nuts. He said, I know. And I said, how can they sit and do an evening review and ask themselves, have I been kind and loving towards all? He said, I don't know. And I said, let alone have we ceased fighting anything or anyone? He said, I know it. It's crazy, ain't it? I said, I know. I said, I want out. I want to quit. I don't want to go no more. I ain't doing it no more. He said, I don't blame you. You should leave it all entirely in their hands, Rick. And that was the first time I heard him say, you only need to ask yourself 2 questions, Rick. See, you got exposed to it. And now you only really need to ask yourselves 2 questions. And the questions are, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? There's some shit you're better off you don't ever know, right? Grace really only lasts as long as ignorance. And once you get some truth about something, then you have to act on it. And that guy hit me with some stuff here. Go on, we'll go away. Just leave it to him. Shh. I can't do that. He goes, yeah, I know. And I'm not saying I was the very best, but I had an interest. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Love is the active interest in that which I claim to love. Right? It's the active interest. Having people serve our fellowship that don't want to do it is not good. Our military figured out in about 1973 or 74 that a non-voluntary military don't work. It don't work. Service to Alcoholics Anonymous is the same way. Being involved in general service because my sponsor said is a really, really bad reason. And believe me, there's probably people in this room that don't agree with me. And I guarantee you there are thousands of people outside of this room that don't agree with me. It's okay. That's what makes this thing work, our difference of ideas. But I can tell you I have the conviction to be able to look at this ninth concept and say, wow, I can back my idea up on principle. Right? Yeah, it might be good for Sean to be a GSR, but is it good for AA? Right? Is it good for AA? And to me, this is stuff that I have to ask myself. Is it good for AA? Am I the best person to be the grapevine chair in Area 24? Nope. Because I don't care about the grapevine. Don't care. Don't care. I got no passion for it. Right? I understand it's a valuable tool of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's a valuable tool for somebody else. There's somebody else that really, really cares about it. They're the ones that need to serve in that capacity, not me. I hope I'm making sense to you. That we need to pick the very best people. Our future depends on it. And I believe that. 10th concept. Every service responsibility should be matched by an equal service authority, with the scope of the authority being well defined. Simply put, if I'm going to give you the job to do, I have to give you the authority to be able to do it the way you want to. Right? Simply put. Let me tell you a story. Well, I'll tell you a story about that later on. But that's a very basic spiritual principle. Given everything that we've got about the right of decision, the right of appeal, the right of participation, now in this 10th concept, it's all coming to a head and saying, if we're going to give you the responsibility to do it, we've got to give you the authority to do it. Only makes sense, right? Otherwise, we're going to be micromanaging people all over the place. And how can 2.5 million of us micromanage that stuff? Hell, we can't even get coffee made right in our own group, right? I seriously have to make coffee in our group. Nobody else knows how to do it right. I've tried and tried, and they're stupid. They don't get it, right? That's a joke, right? So if we're going to give somebody the responsibility to do something, we have to give them the authority to be able to do it. We've got to give them the tools to be able to do it too, right? I'm going to tell you a real practical application of this principle in my world. In July 1998, a friend of mine got killed at work. He was a dredge operator for us. My dad had died in 1994, and this fella kind of became an elder to me. I'd go out and sit on the dredge with him, and he wasn't very mechanical. He was a retired postman, right? But he could run the dredge, and there was 4 or 5 of us that could keep the dredge running. And I'd go out and sit with him. He'd call up and say he needed something fixed, and I'd go out and fix it. And then I'd sit and talk with him. And for about 2 years, I don't have any teeth anymore. I got false teeth now. And part of the reason is because for about 2 years, every day, he'd bring big Tootsie Rolls in and give them to me. I love Tootsie Rolls. I can't eat them now. I take one bite, and my jaws work, but my teeth stay in the same place. And sucks, really sucks. This wife I got now, when we started dating, I said something to her, and she says, listen, my standards aren't very high. All you need is a driver's license, a job, and teeth. And I went, uh-oh. So anyway, Dean got killed at work. And in the mining industry, there's a government body called MSHA. OSHA doesn't have any jurisdiction over the mining industry. We're the only industry in the United States that OSHA doesn't cover. And MSHA came in and conducted an investigation, of course, right away. And there were some things that weren't right. One of the things that weren't right was nobody had been responsible for the mine. See, we're a ready mix company. But we got our own dredging operation. And the dredging operation is what we started. We've probably been dredging sand longer than anybody in the United States, maybe anybody in the world. And we've been doing it since 100 years ago. We've been dredging sand out of that thing. We started with mules over 100 years ago. And it's just something that we do. We just do it. Everybody that'd been around there for 4 or 5 years, we all knew about it. We all went and worked on it. We all did stuff. But nobody was responsible for it. We all were responsible for it. You know what happens when everybody's responsible for it? Nobody's responsible for it. And what happened was this MSHA field supervisor, after 3 or 4 days of investigation, said, here's how this is said to the owners of the company, who at that time was my father-in-law. I work for my ex-wife's family. You don't think that says something about the principles of AA? Right? And it says more about them than it does about me anyway. But they sat in an office with me, my brother-in-law, and my father-in-law. And this superintendent looked at my father-in-law and said, I'm going to make this real clear to you. We're not leaving here until somebody is responsible for that mining operation. We're not going to let you open this back up until somebody is responsible for it. There's no more fictitious guy that's responsible for it, but he ain't been out there for 4 years. That ain't happening. We're not going to let you open back up. At which point my father-in-law turned to me and he said, Rick, will you run that operation for us? And I looked at an inspector who I'd been hanging out with for 3 days, and I'd grown to like the guy. And he wasn't much older than me. And I looked at him and I said, if I take this job and somebody gets hurt, can I go to prison? And he said, yes. And I said, if I take this job and somebody gets hurt or killed, or I get repetitive fines about something, can I personally get fined? Held punitively responsible? He said, yes. At which point I looked at my father-in-law with one of these, right? The family-owned business, right? I still am part of the family, I think. And I looked at him and I said, I'll do it under one condition. And he said, what? And I said, it's my way. And he nodded his head. And my brother-in-law said, absolutely not. I'm not going to have anybody work for us that doesn't do it our way. We own this company. We call the shots. And I said, then find somebody else to do it. At which point, the MSHA guy stepped in and said, it has to be that way. If we're going to hold this guy, if you're going to make him responsible for the safety training, for the safe operation of this thing, and make him put his neck on the line that he can be held civilly and criminally liable, you have to give him the authority to be able to do things the way he sees fit. And I've been doing that job since 1998. And that's a real, true application in my life of our 10th concept. That company does a great job of giving me the authority to match the responsibility that I have. The truth of the matter is when I say I'm not accountable to any human being, shit, I ain't even really accountable at work. They don't ask me stuff. I go for months and don't talk to him. My son has become my boss in the last year. I see him all the time. Other than that, I don't see his uncle or our operations manager. I don't talk to him. They don't talk to me. Everything's good. It's all fine. The point of this is that if we're going to give somebody the responsibility to stick their neck out, they have to have an authority that matches that responsibility. Our General Service Conference is the same way. If we're giving people responsibilities for stuff, we have to give them the authority to be able to have that kind of freedom, to make the decisions, to have the tools to do the job that needs to be done. Right? For us, to do the job for us. Right? The 11th concept. The trustees should always have the best possible committees, corporate service directors, executive staffs, and consultants. Composition, qualifications, induction procedures, and rights and duties will always be matters of serious concern. The trustees have committees. They have the same committees that the conference has. They have there's a trustees committee on literature, a trustees committee on corrections, a trustees committee on public information, a trustees committee on treatment. Right? And these committees need the best possible people that they can get. Almost like the 9th concept, right? We need the best people. Have any of you guys ever heard of an appointed committee member? Pay attention. I shouldn't have been so directive. This may be interesting to you, okay? Occasionally, there will be projects or tasks that the trustees will have to perform. Say a film, a video, or say a pamphlet that may be, or a book that may be going to be published as the result of an action that the conference approved for the corrections committee, right? Or there may be some work that they need to do, the corrections committee, and I'll use the corrections committee because I was on the corrections committee. As I said earlier, I've been involved in corrections work for several years. My appointment to the corrections committee had nothing to do with that. It's truly by lot. I just got lucky. Right? I also became the chairman of the conference corrections committee. So the trustees committees have these projects that need to be done. And believe it or not, of the 4 or 5 or 6 trustees that may be sitting on this committee, none of them may have any experience at all with corrections. They may not have ever been in prison, serving time. They may have never been to a prison. They may have never visited a jail. They may not know anything about it, right? And so these trustees need, oh my gosh, how can they possibly do the task that our conference has asked them to do? Well, so what they do, we form on these committees, we have people, we lobby, or I'm not sure lobby is the right word, but we petition our fellowship for people to come forward that have a stature of expertise within that field. Believe it or not, our fellowship's pretty big. There's not much that we need to petition out folks for help from outside of our fellowship that we can't do here. You want to make a film strip? You don't need to hire somebody from Hollywood to make a video. There's people in our fellowship that can make the damn thing. We just got to get them here. We don't need to go into the corrections facilities and hire, get heads of Department of Corrections or wardens to come. We got people within our fellowship that can help with that committee, that trustees committee, to do their work. They can bring a field of expertise, an expertise in a particular field, to that committee. And so we're asked, as a fellowship, we're asked regularly to fill out resumes. How many of you folks ever done it? I have. Bastards didn't pick me. They shouldn't have. When the folks, there was 3 people that asked me to fill out an application, I said, they're senseless. There's no way I'm the best person to do it. And again, they said, well, ain't you the one that says if all we got to do is follow the policies and procedures? Yeah. So I filled out the thing and sent it in. And the people that got asked to serve on that committee were the right people. Right? Now, they don't have votes in the conference, but they are members of that trustees. They are non-voting members of that trustees committee to help that trustees committee perform the task that we've given them to do. I hope I'm being clear to you guys, right? That the resources exist within our fellowship, and that 11th concept ensures that our trustees have the ability to be able to bring that talent to us. Okay? It's great stuff. So now that brings us to the 12th concept with 10 minutes left. If you guys hadn't ate so much, we could have had questions and answers, right? The conference shall observe the spirit of AA tradition, taking care that it never becomes the seat of perilous wealth or power. The sufficient operating funds and reserve be its prudent financial principle, that it place none of its members in a position of unqualified authority over the others, that it reach all important decisions by discussion, vote, and whenever possible by substantial unanimity, that its actions never be personally punitive nor an incitement to public controversy, that it never performs acts of government, and that, like the society it serves, it will always remain democratic in thought and action. There's 5 warranties, the 5 warranties in the 12th concept. Those warranties are also in our conference charter. And these are some principles that we get to act upon, right? The first one is that the conference never become a seat of perilous wealth and power. We don't ever need more money than we need. Never. Never. And the laws kind of help us with that. We never have money. We should never become a seat of perilous wealth and power. None of its members should be placed in an unqualified position of authority over another. That's a hell of a principle, isn't it? No conference member should ever be in any position of unqualified authority over another. It's an interesting principle to think about. See, as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, that by default makes me a member of the conference. Now, whether I make a decision to partake in that conference, that's up to me. But because I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm a member of the conference. Isn't that neat? Right? I might not be a voting member of the conference, but the conference is bigger than that thing that happens in New York that week in April. It's going to happen a couple of weeks from now. It's what goes on at every area business meeting, every district business meeting, every group business meeting. That's the conference. That's the living, breathing entity that's the conference. And if I'm going to be a member of the conference, how can I say that I'm following this warranty of the 12th concept of not being in any position over an authority, or any position of authority over another member, by telling some new guy, sit down and shut up, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth? Our book on page 18 says that the man who's making the approach has had the same difficulty. That he obviously knows what he's talking about. His whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that this is a guy with a real answer. There ain't no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. And this warranty of our 12th concept says none of us are in any position of authority over any other one. It's a great principle for me to try to apply. Just because I've been sober for 27 years doesn't put me in any position of authority over some guy that's been sober 15 minutes or isn't sober. Right? I've come to a place with this kind, understanding these kind of principles, to see that none of us is more valuable than any other. That girl that I've raised 2 girls. Taylor's 22. She was 14 when I got her. Jessica's the oldest one. Right? Jessica's the one that was 6 when I got her. When she was about 8, she wanted to play ball. Dad, will you teach me how to play ball? Right? I didn't have any kids. I don't know kids. I called my dad. Dad, this little girl wants to learn how to play ball. I'll teach her how to play ball. Dad, I don't know how to teach a girl how to play ball. He said, well, don't teach a girl, teach a kid. He said, hell, you coach Little League. You know how to coach ball. Teach her how to play ball. As a girl. He says, well, no, forget about that. Just teach her how to play ball, right? So we go out and play catch. And I say to her, quit it. Stop it. Honey, you throw like a damn girl. She says, Daddy, I am a girl, right? We got to stop this, right? By the time she was a junior in high school, I would no longer play pepper with her, right? She played college ball. And for Father's Day a few years ago, I get a little thing. That always makes me nervous when I get little boxes like this. And I open it up, and it's a photograph. It's in a frame, and it's a baseball. It's a picture of a dirty old baseball. And on this baseball were these little fingers wrapped around it. All these little fingers are touching it. And superimposed on the baseball is a quote that says, the only value of a life is the impact that it has on other lives. Jackie Robinson. And those fingers on that baseball were my grandkids. That was her way of saying, your life has value to me. Your life has value to our kids. And we know that you value us. And I started to see that within this warranty, I don't have the ability to think of my life as being any more valuable than anybody else's. I've been in a position where I've had an impact on maybe a few more people than some folks do, not nearly as many people as other folks do. But I'm so stupid about this stuff that I don't think my life is of any more value than my dog's. And I mean that. I don't know what my dog's purpose in the whole general thing of life is about, but I got to believe it's just as valuable as mine. So that warranty's a big deal. Now, we're almost done. This thing that we do, this thing called AA, this conference thing that we're all a part of, that it reach all important decisions by discussion, vote, and whenever possible, substantial unanimity. What's substantial unanimity? It's not a simple majority. Substantial unanimity is 2/3 majority, 3/4 majority, right? So that we can be unanimous, so that we can be united in this. We may not be unanimous, but we can at least be united. If 3/4 of us agree, right, we can't really raise a whole lot of hell about it. We can make a fifth concept appeal if we need to, but most of us just take what we need and move on with it, right? Hell, if we made a big mistake, we'll figure it out. We'll go on, right? But here's the important thing. We need to discuss it. And as long as we're talking about it, we're not done discussing it. I truly believe that. As long as we're still talking about it, we probably haven't reached a group conscience yet. And most of the group consciences don't happen in the area business meeting or in the group business meeting. You know where they happen? Out in the parking lot. At Perkins. In the pickup. That's where this discussion takes place. And we're starting to get information. As long as we're talking about it, as long as we're discussing it, we're not done yet. And then we vote. And we'll vote, and we'll vote, and we'll vote, and we'll vote until we quit talking about it. And this warranty is incredibly important to us. And finally, that its actions never be personally punitive nor incitement to public controversy. We're not personally punitive. You don't understand what punitive means. We're not punishing. We don't punish people in AA. We don't punish people in AA. The area treasurer that takes $27,000 out of the area bank account, we don't call the law. We don't do that. We can discuss it, but our hope is, my hope is that there will be people on that area committee that understand this warranty of the 12th concept and say, no, we shouldn't do that. There's reasons for it. Because as soon as we bring the police into it, now that becomes a matter of public record. And now we've drawn the AA name into public controversy. We've created an incitement to public controversy. Right? Bill's writings, by the way, in the back of this service manual, Bill wrote essays on each one of these concepts. Some of it's a little wordy and a little boring, but some of it's pretty neat. And the principle of this warranty, of this concept, is we just don't argue with folks. We've ceased fighting anything or anyone, it says in our 10th step in our book. We're not punitive. We don't punish folks. I stole money from our AA group. Everybody does it. Right? And I paid the money back to them. And after I paid the money back to them, it just was eating me up. I mean, they didn't know I paid it back. And I did a 5th step and told the guy I did the 5th step with about it. And a few months later, I figured out I needed to do more than that. So I was at a Sunday morning meeting. And I was the last person to talk, and the topic was pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And I'm sitting there with a huge stomach ache. And I'm listening to all these people talk about what they think pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization is. And I'm sure that it was just as important as my pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, but it didn't seem like it at the time. And I said, I have to tell you about my pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. It didn't happen when I was drunk. It happened when I was sober at my very best. And I stole money from you people. And I've paid the money back 3 or 4 times over. But I can't get rid of the dirt. I can't get rid of the yucky feeling. And I'm crying. There's 20, 25 people in this meeting, and they're crying. And I'm saying, I'll turn myself into the law if you want to press charges. I'll do anything you guys ask me to do. Just tell me what to do. And they're all just sitting there for 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes. And finally I'm saying, damn it, somebody tell me what to do. If you don't want me, I'll do anything you ask. Just tell me what to do. And an old guy named Lum looked at me with his eyes watered up. He said, keep coming back. Lum didn't know the concepts from shit, right? But he knew in his heart what the right thing to do was. And in a nutshell, we spent 2 hours of me trying to help you decide or to understand that our 12 concepts, although are very worried and scary, they're just common sense. It's just common sense. It's just knowing what the spiritually right thing of how to treat folks is. We just got the principles now to guide us with that. Thanks for your patience. That's all I got. Thanks. I ain't